Welcome to today's episode on the Voice podcast. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Phillip Garlick, the Chief Executive of Product Partnerships Limited. Got a very exciting episode today. We're going to be talking about buy now, pay later, current situation, some of the challenges, and then some actionable steps that you can take. To kick us off, Phillip, could you give us a brief introduction? You've been on the show before, but just for new viewers, and then why is now a good time to be having this conversation?
Thanks for inviting us again, Matthew. It's great to see you. I think the simple answer from a buy now, pay later perspective is that back in 2017, there were £60 million of the transactions, and that's grown exponentially to 13 billion in 2024 and growing beyond. In our small network, we've got £95 million of the buy now, pay later transactions going through our AR network. So, the appetite from a consumer point of view has been unbelievable in terms of growth. And that's created a huge interest from the FCA, who are obviously going to be taking over from July of this year. And PPL look after a number of retail clients in the sector.
Wow, that is an incredible number. Did you say 13 billion?
Correct. Yeah, that was in 24 and it's grown since.
Phillip, I asked our company in the all hands meeting on Monday, I said, put your hand up if you've used buy now, pay later. I couldn't spot anyone that hadn't. It's definitely taking over hugely. What are some of the challenges you're seeing that firms are talking about as we enter this massive growth?
Yeah, I think I humanize the answer to that question when I speak to my clients around, I think about my daughter. Well, there's nothing to stop my daughter walking down the high street and buying multiple products from various retailers on buy now, pay later with little understanding of the implications on her credit rating and little control from the FCA in terms of how much credit she can take. And that's where the risk lies. Now, the operators in this market vary enormously. There's the large companies that do buy now, pay later and smaller companies, and how they operate and how they assess creditworthiness, affordability, all the things we're accustomed to seeing in finance these days varies enormously. So to become a regulated product is a good thing for the consumer, without a doubt.
So just to make sure I've heard that correctly, so as a consumer, you can go take out buy now, pay later. You've got probably, we'll do it in a few transactions with different providers, getting a consolidated understanding of how much you actually owe. The credit card, you've got one balance. This, I guess, opens up, your daughter could have multiple buy now, pay later. And then there's those institutions that are offering the buy now, pay later product. They're not doing a credit worthiness or affordability assessment. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, some are. So it would be incorrect to suggest that some aren't. Some are approaching this market in a very positive and consumer-facing way, and some aren't because they're not obligated. I think the key takeout, and just again to point out that we refer to buy now, pay later because we understand that term. The FCA's title for this now is Deferred Payment Credit, DPC for short. So those products are generally under 12 months, interest-free or 12 payments. And that market is, as we keep saying, unregulated. And yes, you're quite right. The big milestone this year is in July of 2020. So we're going to have all lenders have got to be regulated through the gateway for this product. It becomes a regulated product. And the government passed this across to the FCA at the back end of last year. We've suddenly been through a consultation process where the FCA has asked questions of the impact and implications, of which there are many. And now we seem to have a roadmap as to how it's going to pan out. So we're waiting with bated breath as to what the outcome of that consultation looks like and the policy statement. But we're fairly sure with the detail that's been published, and it's been very helpful, that by July of this year, the roadmap will be that this will become a regulated product. That's a huge change.
Huge change. And that big change will mean that there'll be more affordability scrutiny, how things are communicated to, what are some of the implications, perhaps not on the lenders, but maybe on the providers of the goods and services that are using this payment, or offering this payment method?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, a financial promotion in technical terms is any inducement for credit. So what does that mean in our modern world? Well, when you think about a podcast like today, influencer marketing, social media, the days of financial promotions being a static piece of literature, a poster in a window, a traditional high street environment have changed. We see video screens when we walk down the high street now in modern day retailers. And so is that an inducement for credit? Is it enticing those customers into credit? If it is, then to answer your question, they need to think about risks, warnings, those financial promotions being approved by somebody. And equally, through the food chain from lender to retailer onto the consumer, we do need to think about good outcomes for customers as well. And there are various obligations on the various parties involved in that food chain. But what is definitely going to happen is it's going to be a regulated product in what will be, in many cases, an unregulated environment. That creates problems. So it's very important control and oversight is in place to make sure that the outcomes from customers' point of view are achieved.
What's coming to mind, Philip, is on a cigarette box when it says smoking causes cancer. Is that the type of communication that would need to be verified, but instead perhaps buy now, pay later can cause debt?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very dramatic example. I suppose the answer will be yes. Being slightly kinder to the question, and I found that better brains than myself in our team that do this on day in, day out. You know, the prominence, the positioning, the wording, the color of the font. You know, you can't have a disproportionate advert that says, on one hand, this is a great product, it's going to save you loads of money, get it for this much a month, buy now, pay later. And then a tiny disclosure that says, by the way, there could be some risks and issues around this. It has to be proportionate to each other. So that becomes quite a technical process. And we built a platform to help retailers to solve this, but they also need to think about the oversight of the interaction within their call centers, within their networks, within their stores. How are they engaging with those customers? Because I'd like to think that consumers will start to ask questions now, because there will be a lot of noise and marketing around the launch of this, I'm fairly sure. And then there are certain obligations on consumers to reflect on that and think, well, what am I getting involved in here? So if I was a consumer, I'd ask a question. And that means there's a human interaction then. So you need to think broader than just that static promotion.
Yeah. Consumer interactions. And the growth is definitely, it seems to be amongst the younger generation, 20 to early 30s. And I guess there will be lots of concerned parents, as you mentioned, that might actually be reaching out to these retailers and asking, my son has purchased something, how much am I in for? Or what are the implications? Could you see that happening?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I don't have the demographics to hand, but it is it has been a younger demographic that's been attracted by this. But there's been some quite innovative products launched as well, where the first 3 months are free and then you make your first payments and so on. But the point is, you're quite right that you as a parent in our example would be concerned with those interactions. And I think what's important for retailers is just displaying the risks and warnings in the appropriate fashion. And it can be done in a palatable way. It doesn't need to be a business prevention tool, because this is a positive product. I mean, the growth in this product demonstrates the appetite from a consumer's point of view that they like it. There's no interest. It sounds great. But if you suddenly rack up tens of thousands of pounds of the debt, then that is a problem. And what are the implications if you don't make that payment on time? What happens then?
Yeah. And, the consequences always, come into our world a lot when these phone calls happen at the arrears stage. So yesterday in the office, we're preparing a demo for clients and we're looking through some of their collections calls. And one of my colleagues said, if the client hears this and doesn't take our software, they have no empathy. That's just because of the nature of these conversations. The one person said they're days away from being homeless because of the amount of debt that they've fallen into unexpectedly. So this is going to create a huge, surge in probably calls into at the collections end, but also to the retailers, because you're probably going to call whoever you took out the credit with.
Exactly.
You're not going to know it's the lender. You're just going to phone where you bought the goods.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're quite right. There are obligations on the lender, but human behavior is human behavior. I, as a father, my daughter, I'd like to think if I had a complaint, I'd go to the retailer, and does the retailer know what to do with that? And if it's a large proportion of their business, which is in some cases the finance penetration is very high, then they really need to consider what are they going to do to control those conversations, what are they going to do to control those complaints, and they get passed back to the lender in many cases, not all. And was the financial promotion from the outset, was it appropriately displayed with the right risks and warnings? And being retailers, that's not their core competence. So I think there are massive obligations on what will become regulated lenders that are currently unregulated and equally on retailers.
You mentioned there the risks in the promotion. What are the other sort of challenges you're hearing? I can imagine, you said that it's not meant to be business prevention, but retailers might feel that it will slow down a sale. What are the other things you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, would it slow down the sale? It shouldn't slow down the sale. I think the key thing is getting it right from the outset and being able to sell with confidence. Walk in the consumer's shoes. If you were getting involved in a credit product of any nature, no matter what, even if it was on a retailer like Amazon, that they offer products not dissimilar to this. Do you understand what you're getting involved in here? Do you understand the terms? Do you know when it starts, when it ends? And do you know the implications? If something goes wrong in life, the what-if scenarios, as we always say. So, we quite often refer to the arrears scenarios, but it's not necessarily that. What do we do if I've just got a late payment? I've got a problem with my wages coming in and paid weekly or whatever else. Who do I call? Who do I speak to? And what are the implications? They need to know those implications at the outset, not at the end of the process, but at the outset. And in some instances, when you've got a small social media ad, you can't put a whole page of disclosures. So where does it signpost them to? What does it say to them about that? So there's a lot to think about in unpacking that in our modern world of communicate with consumers in a completely different way.
And Philip, the smaller firms, how are they expected to review this? I mean, they probably have a couple dozen people.
So if a smaller retailer is dealing with a reputable, large lender who offers buy now, pay later credit, and they are promoting their material, they're likely safe because that large lender is going to have an army of people policing to make sure that what they give the retailer is portrayed to the consumer in a great way. But the easiest way is to seek advice from a third-party firm. And excuse the shameless plug. We are a few firms in the country that's getting very technical now, a Section 21 approver. And what that means, under Section 21 of the Financial Services Markets Act, FSMA, all any body who's a regulated entity not approve a third party's financial promotions. They can approve their own, but not a third party. So the FCA put firms like ourselves through the rigor of making sure we are qualified enough and we've got a technology stack to support these retailers to help make sure that they're advertising these products in a compliant fashion. But, we might be a rare breed, but I would seek advice from reputable. But if you're dealing with a fairly decent size third-party lender, I'd like to think, without mentioning names, they will look after you on that journey. But there are a lot of firms out there offering this product in what will be an unregulated fashion come July.
And when it comes July, when it gets to being regulated, as a retailer, you now have a decision, I guess. Do you keep offering this? Do you see any retailers deciding to take it off the table, or is it just helping them grow their sales too much? They wouldn't do that.
The conversations we've had with our retailers so far have been, well, hey, if things are going to get more onerous in terms of how we sell the product that we enjoy selling today, there's a point of reflection commercially that should we become a FCA authorized credit broker, so under limited permission, become a credit broker, because it then gives them the freedom to say, well, hey, we do an interest-free product, a deferred payment credit product, buy now, pay later, but we also do an interest-bearing product potentially. And I'm just giving those two illustrations. So it allows them more freedom to offer a selection, a blended proposition to the consumer. And that's where they may take a pause in time and go, do you know what? I'd like to be regulated by the FCA. And then I know I'm safe. I'm doing things in the right way. In this world where they are at the moment, which is I'm an unregulated retailer, know nothing about what the FCA does, but I'm suddenly having to sell a regulated product in a compliant and advertise in a compliant way. They might choose to be safe and become regulated, or they might choose to withdraw the product, to your point, I guess. But we haven't seen that. The appetite from a consumer's point of view is too great.
And Philip, these larger lenders, not to mention names, but I'm sure they are, would be very willing to partner with your company to get that Section 21 support to these retailers. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I can't disclose names
Yeah.
in the end contract, but we do work with 2 or 3 firms for the purposes of that. And we refer to them as merchants, but they're retailers. They've got very large merchants networks and retailer networks. Now, it's not just having the technology and the resource to actually be able to do these approvals in the compliant fashion, but they have an obligation as a lender to make sure what they have approved through ourselves actually ends up in front of a consumer in an appropriate fashion. So has it been infected, adjusted, altered in any way? If I give you a financial promotion today and do you know what? I'm going to put this banner ad around the top of it. You've changed the context of it straight away. So policing that network is key. So I think, we work with a number of lenders now that are helping and holding their hand through the transition and getting to the other side where ultimately they're going to have to police that network more closely. There's no doubt this, which is the right thing to do for the consumer, falling under the FCA's regime is a good thing. But equally, it will also mean a number of additional questions and reporting requirements that are going to come out of this as time progresses.
Sure. And on the consumer, they'll get access to the FOS now. They could put a complaint in. So that's also a new avenue.
I mean, we're waiting for the output from the consultations. As I said, the pace of change generally is relatively slow, but on this particular subject, I've found the pace of change. I mean, I've been in regulated environments for 30 years now, unfortunately, hence the grey hairs. But I think the key thing is that there's a real momentum and an energy, and it's driven by those initial numbers we said at the beginning, that the rise in this market is so biblical and the appetite is so consuming that it needed to be a regulated product. There's no two ways about it. But where it starts and where it ends might be two different things.
Philip, going over to sort of solutions. So you've got your experts at Product Partnerships Limited. You also have the best technology. Talk to me a bit about that intersection. So how are you seeing technology help with this policing?
Well, I mean, we've got our own proprietary built platform, Optimus, but we also, we work with you guys. Voice gives us the data, and then we give them the compliance pathway, and together we make regulation sort of achievable rather than being overwhelming. And that's the key to me, is that technology in our industry, whereas before it was quite thematic or test-based, so you take a cohort of calls or you take a cohort of cases or files and you review them, but it was a lottery as to whether or not you found a good or a bad one or something to unpick. What technology does is it allows us, so in the example of Voice, to listen to 100% of calls, triage them and bring back the ones that need to be listened to because there's an issue, a vulnerable customer in difficulty, a customer with speech impediments, whatever the issue may be. And then operators can actually analyze that in a professional way and make sure that the issues are addressed accordingly.
I just thinking back on when we started working with you, I remember that one of the things you were very sort of strict about was making sure that if there's a conversation happening and finance is discussed, that it's discussed properly. And if finance shouldn't be discussed, that it's not discussed. And I can imagine this now is just going to result in more conversations needing to be reviewed to make sure that things are following the right policies.
Yeah, go back to your earlier question about what would a retailer do. So you're talking about an unregulated retailer, and they suddenly get a call from a consumer. To your point, if they chose as a business to disallow their operators not to talk about finance and they signposted the consumer in the right way, you still need to police that to make sure what you wanted to happen does happen. So it's not always a negative or a positive scenario you're looking for, but sometimes it's just about control. Do you know what's being said to consumers and are they getting the right information? Because the intent from a policy point of view might be honourable, quite correct and appropriate. But the reality of human beings is we all stumble and we ask questions and they've got to be answered, those questions. So policing that's quite key.
I called a high street retailer and I said, I've got a question on the buy now, pay later. So they put me through to the laptop section, and the sales associate there correctly said, I can't have this conversation with you. You need to contact the lender. Now, I could have potentially laid a complaint and said I was told XYZ and be disingenuous and dishonest. And I doubt they'd have any way of proving otherwise, because it was my word versus that associate. So definitely controls, more quality control. Having the data to prove that we're not having those conversations is going to definitely be a big point. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what we know today may be one thing, but as it becomes regulated in July, and then you ask, let's say we're talking about this again in another 18 months' time, I'm fairly sure that the roadmap from an FCA point of view won't stop at just regulating the lenders from July, because questions will be asked around some of the conversations we're having now. What happens to the consumer? What does it look like? And albeit at the moment, they don't need to be regulated. The retailers, their financial promotions need to be approved by this third party. It becomes quite complex. What I would say is that the lenders are going to start asking about outcomes, because they are obligated in the consumer duty to make sure they're getting good outcomes. So the only way they can do it is to converse with their retailers. And back to your point, evidence, proof, control, all these factors come into play. As to where the ownership lies in some of these things is yet to be decided, but there's a big vacuum going to happen, that's for sure.
And I guess the lenders will put more of that pressure onto the retailers, because they don't want to deal with the consequences of late payments. So they'll probably want the retailers to be doing as much as possible so that this is distributed sustainably and they don't result in a lot of missed payments and stuff.
But take this as a sort of compounding effect on those lenders. The return at the moment for many regulated firms, and forgive me in terms of numbers of data points, but it's kind of single digit for, say, a secondary credit broker. These returns from the FCA point, the FCA is becoming more of a data-driven regulator and asking for more data points. So where did the source of that lead come from? Where are you generating leads from? What are you paying for those leads? Are you incentivizing anybody? So they're asking for more and more information. Now, that's got to filter down to the retailers at some point. And again, I play back to the point you made earlier that my experience of this journey so far since 22, when a lot of noise was started to be made around this product and it grew quite rapidly, is that some retailers are just pausing and saying, we're going to become regulated. It's the easiest and safest thing to do, because we'll understand the lingo, the language, and the obligations, and be able to do things in a more compliant way. Some won't, and then they equally need to think about how they're going to control how they convey these messages to consumers.
As you're talking, what comes to mind is if there ever becomes a point where the majority of your sales are via buy now, pay later, then you're almost like selling the buy now, pay later, not the product. It tips.
Yeah, well, I spoke to a retailer this morning in our offices, and their finance penetration is in excess of 65%. So 65% of their transactions are going through finance. Granted, not all buy now, pay later, but a very large proportion is. And the swingometer, if I can call it that, between interest-free, buy now, pay later, and interest-bearing is moving. And there's more appetite for it. It's more cost to the retailer. So I think, again, this consumer appetite is driving a lot of the changes that are going to come up across on the horizon.
And Philip, the authorization, if firms do go through this authorization, what does that process look like?
So the lead times at the moment from the SLAs from the FCA may be one thing, but the lead times from the FCA at the moment are very favourable. The FCA have been quite supportive and accommodating to firms now to help stimulate the economy and drive growth, which is a good thing. But it is still a very complex process. A regulated business plan, financial forecast, your senior management team being scrutinised with DBS checks and such like, policies and procedures. That's just the start of that. Once they've been approved, how do you actually operate and run a regulated business? And the secret to success is good controls and monitoring all the time. Are you listening to what's going on in your business and making sure you're getting great outcomes for consumers? So it's quite an arduous journey for many, but probably the safest route.
Would you say these controls and good compliance are starting to be the new competitive edge for firms?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, again, I allude to the retail I spoke to this morning, and one point we touched on was the fact that the attrition rate in retail from a staff personnel point of view is quite high in retail, always has been. With that in mind, you're constantly retraining staff. And the team's confidence is the colleagues' confidence in being able to sell these products and not having to second guess what they're saying to consumers and thinking about what they're saying and knowing what they can say and what they can't say and where they can rely in terms of controls and disclosures to keep them on the honest path is really essential. And so I think for many, it's about giving their store staff the confidence and not scaring them so they can articulate things in a clean, succinct manner from a consumer's point of view. The unknown's a terrible thing for many of these firms, and just helping them with that is key.
So hearing you speak, I'm seeing like, it seems like there's a few ways that they can be helped. So one is, they team up with a specialist firm that's got Section 21 approval, like yourself, helps them review the communications and promotions, or they go regulated, both potentially as well. And then thirdly would be an AR? Would that be an option?
Yeah, I mean, there are larger retailers with the right background, experience and infrastructure, subject to due diligence, could become an appointed representative, an AR, as you've alluded to. And that is, they sit underneath someone's permissions, like ourselves, and we are like their third-party outsourced compliance party. But it is a collaboration of minds. What we do in that process is make sure, subject to approval, that they run their business in a compliant fashion. But many firms that choose this path are usually choosing it because their core competence isn't regulated activity. It's retailing products and goods and services. So it's the tiniest part of their business, and yet they haven't got that core competence. So we'll implement it. And quite often they'll go on a journey where you almost host them for a period of time, and then eventually become self-authorized. You need your hand holding on that journey. And that journey is going to take a year, 2, 3 years in time. So it just depends on the size of the business, the credentials of the business and everything else. But yeah, it is an option for many.
So putting the hat on of a retailer and a merchant now, what should they be doing in the next, we're 5 months, 6 months away from July? What should they be doing now to prepare for this?
If they're currently offering buy now, pay later products, first and foremost, talk to the lender that you're doing business with. Ask them what their roadmap looks like, what's going to change, what obligations they have on them, and consider who you're transacting with. As I said, the larger, well-known firms, in the main, from my experience and our experience, has been, they want to do the right thing. So many are doing this already, that they're executing agreements in appropriate fashion and control a network. All I would say is there's no doubt when they become regulated and the FCA start to request management information from these firms about the retailers and what's happening, it's bound to have an impact on retailers and what they do at the front end. Again, you come back to your point. A consumer, like my daughter, is allowed to walk through the door and say, I've got a question about this. How are they going to handle that? Where did they signpost them? What do they say? What do they not say? So there's a lot of what-if scenarios yet to be unpicked. But I think the first thing they should do is speak to the lender they're dealing with.
Speak to the lender they're dealing with. Have the sort of small business, membership associations, have they said anything about this?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of, going back to 22, the FCA wrote to the British Retail Consortium, and, I've got the letter in front of me, and it's quite formidable to read the words 2 years imprisonment for failure to having financial promotions signed off by the appropriate body. When you read
it literally says prison in the writing.
Right. Yeah, up to 2 years imprisonment for failing to have a financial promotion advertised in the correct manner by the correct body. Now, there's a lot of understanding behind that, and there's a lot of technicalities that I wouldn't dream of getting too technical on this call, but all I would say is ask the questions of who you're dealing with. And if it's one of the well-known lenders out there, they're going to have a roadmap, and we're dealing with many of them already and speaking to them about how we can work together on making sure this is embedded properly. But there's many other lenders out there that are not operating in that way.
And you need to keep yourself safe. You got to look after number one to start with. Don't assume the lender's going to do it all. Do not do that. And if in doubt, pick up the phone to a firm like ourselves and we'll just chat you through it. We wouldn't charge you for just having a conversation. And we'll charge you for doing the work, but we can have a conversation about how we can help.
And on the technology front, Philip, what are you seeing firms should be thinking about to support them?
Well, I'm a born retailer previous to working in 30 years. I'm very old, but I think I always said in retail, it's all about control. It's about management information. It's about measuring things. So, for example, if you've got people interacting with consumers over the phone, you should be recording those calls and listening to those calls. If you can't have the capacity to listen to them, plug in technology such as voice. But equally, if you've got interactions, mystery shopping companies could be used. It depends on how you intend to engage with consumers. The biggest thing is making sure the marketing department's very aware of what's going on and what's coming on the horizon here. And again, if you're unsure, reach out to the lender you're dealing with or to a firm like ourselves, and we can help with that. But understand the severity and the implications of if consumer harm was proven, it's going to be quite onerous for many. So I think seek answers to questions now early before it becomes regulated.
I can imagine some lenders might say to retailers, you can only offer our buy now, pay later if you have X, Y, and Z controls. Could you see that?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I mean, we deal with one particular firm who is very explicit about how they convey their finance product, is very explicit about how they don't in fact change or alter that and the kind of merchant pack that comes with doing business with them. But is equally very explicit about asking questions about what happens to consumers thereafter. And can't assume they're all going to suddenly realize it's the lender and who's the name of the lender, what's the contact. They will do exactly what you've suggested. They'll walk through the retailer's threshold and they'll talk to them. So how are they going to deal with that? What should they share? What shouldn't they say? Yeah, it's a really unusual scenario what's going to happen this summer. But yeah, we're going to be very interesting.
It seems like the worst case, extreme case is prison, but a medium bad case is you lose a percentage of your sales because the lender withdraws your permission, your ability to use their service.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're quite right. If the lender feels that the retailer isn't executing their rules in the appropriate way, they will, I'm fairly sure, terminate the terms of their agreement, and then you've lost a revenue stream. And I think, again, engaging early, understanding what's happening, the implications on you, and what do you want to do longer term as a retail organization? Is our interest-bearing products possibly on the horizon? Are other products going to be falling to the product suite? Are you just using buy now, pay later today because you don't need to be regulated? Is there a wider conversation to have? There's a number of things to think about there. But I think it's remiss of a retailer to suddenly write it off and say, it's the lender's problem, it's not my problem. It is your problem because you're the one advertising it. So are you sure you're doing things in the right way?
A part of me is quite happy because dealing with retailers in the past, the IT estates have been quite archaic. So this is another reason to improve, digital transform, get more data, get more MI. It's definitely going to move the whole sector in the right direction for the consumer and also for these retailers.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, you can sell with confidence. It's not a business interruption. It's part of the DNA of the business. Retailers and their staff become more accustomed to understanding how to operate things. They know they're being monitored in a positive way, that things are being triaged in the appropriate fashion. It's just important. It's the appropriate thing to do. It is quite a unique scenario to have these unregulated entities selling a regulated product. And my personal view is that it's going to create a lot of problems over time. And who knows, this might become a regulated product for the brokers as well, but that's not today.
And in sort of wrapping up, Philip, what would you say one piece of advice to give to firms so that they can balance this compliance, speed, customer experience? What would it be?
I think key thing is, as I said earlier on, engage early and get the information that you need. But to answer your question specifically, controls, technology, and good MI point you in the right direction. If you've got that information to hand,
you know where to dig deeper. And I always say to my team, without MI, we can't go anywhere. We need that information to be able to say, that's where we should be digging deeper. That's where the HUD should be lifted up. And that's really important. And equally, the marketing teams in many of the retailers should really ponder and consider what's going on here. Because the necessity for additional risks and warnings going into these financial promotions is there. And they can take, the lead time can be weeks and months in some instances to get them out to their networks in time. So yeah, there's a number of things to think about.
So controls, technology, and MI, speak to your lenders. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you everyone for listening. We will have Phillip Garlick, the Chief Executive of Product Partnerships Limited's details below, and you can reach out should you need any advice from the experts in the United Kingdom, the number one firm that can help you with this. Thank you.
That's very kind of you, Mike.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.